we are.
Let's go ahead and get started if we can. It is the summer, and some of us, well, all of us have other things we want to be doing or would like to do. And we welcome you out to our Advisory Council meeting. I think officially we have enough to start. And so we'll move forward with that. I hope you all are having a good summer. It's the heat's kind of ramped up, and I'm not sure what our safety minute is, but we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. And so if you don't know, this is Steve Meyer's last official meeting, right? Advisory Council. So you're going to be doing more meetings? Oh, shoot. I thought this ended here. I asked him to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, so. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, safety minute. You ready?
Chair, council members, appreciate the opportunity to give the safety message, and I'm going to go right along the lines of what you were thinking. It's supposed to be 95 degrees out there today. If you take a look at the 2-week forecast, we're going to push 100 for the next 2 weeks. Hardly any trace of rain coming our way. And so, especially for those of us in leadership positions where we have folks that work out in the elements all day, we need to be cognizant of that and make sure they get breaks. And for all of us, we need to make sure we stay hydrated because of the weather. Thank you.
Thank you. So it looks like we might have some public comment. Karen's excused, so I will go ahead and, let's see, Claudia Johnson.
Hi, I'm Claudia Johnson, and I want you to know that the board of directors that you have had in this place have been a great board of directors. I've been really impressed with the quality of work that they have done. They have learned their roles, their responsibilities, and I believe they understand the company, which I think is important in any company, that they really understand, but also that they ask questions that, for me, if I was on that position or if I could raise my hand, I would say, what about? And I think that they've done a great job, especially having taken over in a frustrating and interesting situation, but they have done a great job, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that I've worked for companies before where we became a family. And after having been retired, or I should say laid off, for some of us for about 15 years, we're still meeting together because we're still a family. And that's the feeling that I have gotten from watching and working with the UTA members of this company, is that it is a family. It's not just a business, it is a family, and the communication that people have one with another and the rapport that UTA has amongst themselves has been very good and very positive. And having come from a positive environment that way, I understand what it means to be a family as a company. And I think that there needs to be a kudos to all the employees. Some of them I have worked more closely with, others I haven't, and everybody knows my name. I don't know if that's good or bad, but anyway. But anyway, I just wanted to express that. And I hope that as the advisory board, that you too will be able to be an asset to UTA and be able to look at it as a complete, not just your little piece that you're working with. And I just wanted to make sure I made that comment. Thank you.
Well, it's good that we know your name, because that way you feel at home. So, Carlton, Beth, and Kent, kudos. Glad to see that people come forward and recognize your efforts. And we'll try not to drop the ball as the advisory council. We'll try to do our due diligence and participate at the level that is supportive and helpful in moving the organization forward. So thank you. That's the only public comment that I believe was listed. So let's go ahead and move on to approval of the June 12th, 2019 Advisory Council meeting minutes. Any corrections?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Clint.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I think that was unanimous. Thank you. So I get to report a little bit on a meeting that I was invited to attend with Carlton. It was at the interim transportation. Yeah. So Carlton was able to make a report to that committee, and it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever been seated, and Beth can attest to this, next to Carlton. You try to be a little bigger in your seat because you seem dwarfed when you're seated next to him. But we spent some time there, and there was some comment that came out from Senator Wayne Harper, and I wanted to have a little discussion, at least make you aware of Advisory Council committee members. He had asked a question to me, inviting us, what are we doing as far as engagement with our appointing authorities, the ones that have appointed us to this advisory council. And so I'd like you to give that a little bit of thought, your interaction with your appointing authority, things that are going well, things that could go better. And if you'll take some time in the next, several weeks or whenever it's convenient, and if you can just kind of send me some highlights so I can make a report to Senator Harper. I made a commitment to follow up with him. I've had a couple that I spoke to personally, and they've sent me way more than I intended to receive. I won't mention their name, but a pretty in-depth report of what they've been doing. It's more just connecting with them, asking the questions, let them know they have a source or a connecting point where they can give you this council as well as the commissioners some feedback. I know that the commissioners have been very active in pursuing and getting out and engaging the different areas where the service is being provided. And Senator Harper complimented them on that. And so if you can just kind of, I don't want to give you homework, but just a note of what you're doing, the pros and cons, if there are concerns or issues, let me know so I can make a report back to him. Okay. Carlton, was there anything, it's basically, Senator Harper said that things are going great at UTA. I think he said that the number of complaints that he's receiving has really gone down. So he gauges that as a good compliment of the work and effort that's going on there. So I think that was pretty much it. So, and Carlton took most of the time. I was just we did have a little discussion on TODs. There is a set limit that they've legislatively put on, and we've reached that as an organization. And so there was some discussion about taking that limit away. What was the justification? Why was it put in place? And I think the feeling was it was just arbitrary. It was not really any study or anything, but most of the mayors or other people representing communities were very anxious to see that increase, to have that opportunity to participate with UTA in some aspect. And actually not that UTA drives that the communities can drive that and come and approach UTA about providing some sort of opening for them to partner. So I thought that was helpful, a positive move. Have you heard anything more about that, Carlton?
Where we continue to work with them and, and our own lobbyists about how to strategically move forward.
Yeah. Okay.
But they voted as a committee to take that into performance.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to our Board of Trustees report. Carlton, please. Chair Carlton.
Be joined by my two colleagues, and we'll just kind of take a little bit tag team. I just following up on Jeff's comments. We do appreciate as a board the advisory council and your work, and we're both figuring out how to best do our respective roles, and considering there's not a model to mirror after, I think we've done a pretty admirable job in the 8 months or so that we've had the opportunity to serve together. We just wanted to touch base on a couple of things that have happened recently, in addition to the legislative report and where we are to the Transportation Interim Committee. We also took the opportunity as a board to reach out to the governor. We realize he's technically our boss and wanted to make sure we were going down a road that he was comfortable with. We took the opportunity to take a format that we had prepared for federal delegations but refine it back more toward our response to the governor. You should have a copy of that, and we provided that with the governor. We used it in some editorial board meetings that Beth is going to just chat about. But overall, we felt the governor was very positive with us, seemed satisfied with the direction that we were heading, and expressed his concern about how do we deal with growth, and both as a state and certainly our role as a transit agency there, and meet the needs. It's one of the things he acknowledged sort of keeps him awake at night. But we felt like at the end of the day it was a very productive dialogue, and he encouraged us to keep moving forward in the general direction that we're heading. So, but as you read through that report, if you have comments or concerns or questions, we certainly would welcome those. You want to maybe touch base on our editorial board meetings?
Happy to. Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity. And yes, I am trying to sit up taller. We had an opportunity to meet with the Deseret News editorial board this past week, and then the previous week we met with the Salt Lake Tribune's board. And with both of those boards, we did give them a copy of the pamphlet that you guys have in front of you, and that talks some about our priorities, what we've been focused on doing, and what we're looking at larger term. And the general gist of it, I'll talk about first the Deseret News editorial board. I thought it was pretty constructive in terms of the dialogue and the questions that they asked, and they asked about some of the things that we're working on, what we're looking to do with growth. Microtransit was a curiously hot topic in a good way, and they also wanted to see how we were doing and how we interacted with the advisory council. So, and the Salt Lake Tribune, very similar. They're asking questions. They want to know, I think, if we're really getting down and getting to understand the organization and being able to get it through to deal with the growth issues that we're having in the future. And they also did ask about TODs, so transit-oriented developments, and what our role would be in an ideal scenario. So if you have any other questions, happy to answer it. I think that overall, our perception, and we were all three of us at both of those meetings, we really felt that was, I think it's very productive for us to be engaged and helping them to understand, and certainly to get questions that they might not have normally asked. So, yes.
So may I ask, it sounds like the focus is moving forward, looking forward. Historically, it seems like we've never been able to get away from the past, but it's, at least based on what you're saying, we're really looking at the issues ahead of us, the growth, and
I would.
I would say that there were still questions about some of the past, and they did ask, how did we deal with things? They asked about the federal monitor. They asked about some of the other things that have kind of led us, have had us had struggles that we had, and then the initial discussion with TOD was similar to that. But then it was asked, well, how do you address that, and how do you move that forward? So.
Good.
So I think we're still having to clarify and respond.
Well,
Yes, I don't think it's
don't
like.
let it discourage you. You guys are doing great. Just keep moving forward.
That's the goal. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you've already mentioned that Steve Meyer may be coming close to the end of his reign or term or whatever we want to call it. And one of the things that that we as a board have done recently, and I think we were each called and informed, that we have hired a new executive director. Her name is Carolyn Gannott. She comes to us from the Valley Transit Authority out of San Jose, California. Has well over 20 years of experience in the transportation transit industry, and she brings a considerable amount of knowledge and enthusiasm and excitement that she brings to this position. She will take her position formally on the 19th of August, and shortly after that, we will be having some open houses so that you'll have an opportunity to meet her, and she certainly will be here for your September meeting as well. So we're really pleased that we have been able to find a person of that caliber to come and join us here at UTA.
We also plan to have a farewell for Steve and not let him out the door without a little bit of roasting, so. Did you want to talk about the UVX?
Yeah, I'll mention the UVX tour. On August the 22nd, we're going to host a tour down at the UVX, the Bus Rapid Transit System in Orem and Provo. We'll start in Orem at about 8:30 in the morning on the 22nd. It's specifically for all of the legislators in Utah County, but certainly the two mayors that sit on this board, we invite you to join us for that, specifically those in Utah County, Julie and Jeff. But any of the others of you that would like to join us on that on the 22nd of August, please join us. We'll start at the Orem Frontrunner Station at about 8:30 in the morning. We'll go jump on the UVX and go over into Provo, and we'll meet with some of the local officials there and just give you a chance to take a look at that UVX system. But that'll be on August the 22nd.
Seems like we had both the university presidents on the last little tour we
Yes, we
had.
did.
And I think we had chocolate milk there as well. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to pique the interest a little bit and see if we can get people there. It was a good tour. I thought it was well done, and I'm sure
Yes,
this
it
will be
was, and
equally
we're
as
going
well.
to do the same thing. We've
Yeah.
had very considerable interest from people on the north end of our district up in Weber and Davis counties. A number of people have gone on those tours, and so we're going to do that for the legislative group down in Utah County.
Well, good. We'll reach out to them and encourage them to attend as well.
Well, we hope you will do that, and you will each be getting a formal invitation.
So one of the last things we wanted to talk about, and of course you guys can always ask questions, but for those of you who know, we've been doing tours of the UVX specifically, especially from my area, Ogden, Weber County, Davis County. And one of the things that we are going to do we're going to up it a little bit, and we're going to do a transit academy. So you guys get to come to us in a way. And we're looking forward to doing that. We are going to have our first transit academy on September 19th. And it's going to be at our Warm Springs facility. So for those of you who don't know, that's just up the road a little bit. And it is going to be how to do transit. What do you I don't know that you're going to get to ride and be an operator just yet, but we'll get you there if we can. So that's kind of the next thing that we want to do. It had been something that was done when I was a council member. I remember going to a transit academy, and I thought it was fantastic. I got to operate a TRAX, and I thought I was all that. And so we wanted to kind of start that up again to get people to be more familiar with the system, to understand some of the capacities and other things about our system. And so that has been, I think the tours that we have done has really engaged a lot of different people. And so now we're going to kind of do this and up it a little bit.
I've driven a front runner, so it's pretty good.
Oh, okay. Now that took
They
it to
didn't
a
let
whole
me
new
loose.
level.
I mean, it was very controlled, but
That concludes our report. I'm certainly open to any questions.
thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, Steve, you're up to bat.
Okay. I would just echo Trustee Millington's invitation to you. All these, there's a lot of bus rapid transit planned in the long-range plan throughout the UTA Transit District, so it's a great opportunity to show you and highlight one of the successful new projects we've had. Ridership's great. UVU will be back in session during that, so you'll have to compete for seats on the bus, but it's a great problem to have. One other thing I'd highlight, yesterday we noticed that we recognized the transit app on your phones. I don't know how many of you have that, but it's available on most phones in your app store. It's called just Transit, and we recognize that as our preferred app for travel planning. And it's a great tool for planning your trip across the different modes. You can link into the rideshare, Uber and Lyft. You can see the bike station locations as well. So it's very helpful, and I encourage you all to get that. And if people have questions, to recommend that as a trip planning tool for our riders. Thank you.
Any questions for Steve? Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on. Mary, you're going to take a little bit of time and share with us some information that you've been able to bring together.
Yes, hi, I'm Mary DiLoretto, the Director of Capital Projects here at UTA, and I've asked Loretta Markham to join me. She is the project manager consultant for this project.
Welcome.
So what we're asking today is for the adoption of the locally preferred alternative for the Mid-Valley Connector BRT project. We brought this project to you a few months back and gave you more of the details, but just for a brief overview, it's a new bus rapid transit project that connects Murray Central Tracks and Front Runner Station to the Salt Lake Community Camp, Redwood campus, and then on to the West Valley Central Track Station. It's about 7 miles total with 1.4 miles exclusive lane along 4500 South. And the project was done as a local environmental project, meaning we did not follow the federal environmental process, so we are not anticipating asking for federal funds on this project. The draft environmental study report was completed back in November, and we had a public open house the day after, and the comment period's over. We received about 10 public comments. Total, we received one petition with about 145 signatures, but that was more regarding opening 1300 West onto 4500 South, which is not part of this project. So the mayor addressed those comments directly and explained it was not part of this project. So here's more detail on the LPA. As I told you, it's a 7-mile project with 1.4 miles of dedicated right-of-way. There will be 15 stations, a frequency of 10 to 15 minutes. We anticipate needing 11 buses, and we anticipate on opening day, if it's 2021, we would have 2,200 to 2,700 riders and a capital cost of $45.4 million. And the operating O&M cost includes leasing those buses. So right now, the LPA status, we've had the 3 partner cities have all adopted the LPA over the past several months. Wasatch Front Regional Council has it included in their long-range transportation plan. And right now, we are requesting that the Advisory Council approve that LPA. And if they do, we'll bring it to the Board of Trustees at their next meeting for their approval. So here's the capital funding, what's needed and what's been committed to so far. This price is a little different. This 53 million compared to the 45 I showed on the other page, and that's because it includes that 7.6 million of right-of-way that has already been donated or committed. So with what's been committed so far, you can see the difference. There's still another 34 million needed in funding for that project construction. The reason we're coming today and asking for approval of the LPA without the funding in place is because this will allow 2 things. It will allow the decision document to be finalized, and that task to be completed by the consultant. And then it'll also allow design to be started without the risk of designing a project and then the alignment changing. And with that more detailed design, we can get a better cost estimate to construct the project. So what we're asking today is if the Advisory Council adopts the LPA, then we could take it to the Board of Trustees for their adoption. And then, and that allows the decision document to be completed and the engineering to start. And then once the funding commitments are all finalized, then the capital project plan will come back with that to the Advisory Council for their approval. So, any questions?
Questions? Where's the funding coming? No, that's not. That's the obvious question. That's the elephant in the room, right? Leonard, do you have any questions or concerns? Yeah. Well, it seems like the cities, they've collaborated, they've come together with good direction, they've vetted it, and they've got a preferred line that they want to have, and so are we okay with that? I mean, I assume we are. Mayor, you okay with that? Mayor Hales?
I was just wondering about Taylorsville City. Have they made commitments toward this as it goes through or right by their city?
They've adopted by resolution the LPA as well. Their city council has.
Yeah, we have to.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the LPA as presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Leonard. A call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It was unanimous.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work. Hopefully there won't be any changes. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're moving along. Good. So Monica Morton's, I guess it's the fare policy we're going to discuss. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Fair to say?
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Morton. I'm the Affairs Director here at UTA. I get the opportunity to consult with you today on the board policy for fair. I'd like to go through it. A copy was included in your packet, but I'll go ahead and step through that with you now. So the purpose of this policy is to establish and maintain an effective fare system. Although the fare system is already established, we are reestablishing the foundation, and this will allow us to work towards an optimal fare system that supports future growth, which is key. In addition, maintaining an effective fare system will help us streamline the day-to-day operations and become more efficient over time. So this table here is a snapshot of the fare pricing, and fare pricing is one of 3 components of a fare system, the other 2 being policy and payment. So down the left-hand side, you can see 4 pricing elements, and then across the top of the table, you can see the related governance. Now, I'm not going to go over this in detail with you, but I do want to point out that all of the pricing elements shown here will be included in this new fare policy. So the first is to evaluate and establish base fare rates in compliance with federal and state requirements. The base fare rates are the first line in this table. It comprises the current UTA public fare schedule and the related resolution that was adopted in 2011. Identifying specific rates will not be part of this policy. Rates will be adopted separately in an updated resolution. Second, the Board of Trustees will approve discounts to base fare rates, free fare, and special fare rates. This includes the last three lines in the pricing matrix. Prior board policy delegated certain pricing elements to the executive director. Upon approval of this policy, all pricing will go through the Board of Trustees. The board fare policy also includes a statement on fare media. Responsibilities include the approval of new fare media and any changes to existing fare media. The FTA requires a fare equity analysis for fare changes, including fare media, so we recommend this be part of the policy. Fourth, the executive director will notify the Board of Trustees of contract negotiation status for educational programs and bulk past purchases that are over $200,000. Keep in mind that revenue contracts often require several back and forth discussions with our partners on the contract language, the length, the fare media, and the pricing, to name a few. These negotiations and discussions take time, and sometimes they have lasted as long as 2 or 3 years. So the intent of this language is to keep the lines of communication open regarding the status of our key partnerships. Fifth, the Board of Trustees may delegate its approval authority. As we optimize the fare system, it's important to establish strong communication lines with the Board of Trustees through this policy. However, over time and in certain situations, it may be necessary to delegate approval authority. So this clause provides the flexibility to accommodate instances where delegation would be required. And now to cover the final two items of the policy. Item 6 states that the Board of Trustees will approve requests for sponsored service, complimentary service, charter service, and sponsored fares. Several times a year, we have external stakeholders with special service requests that generate additional revenue outside of fares. We also have opportunities for community engagement and support. Partnerships play a key role at UTA, and we desire to accommodate all these special requests, but we do recognize that resources are limited. So as we connect and collaborate more with stakeholders, it's important for us to build confidence and show that our decisions and processes are effective, consistent, and equitable. So this section of the policy gets the Board of Trustees involved through additional dialogue and input on decisions being made in response to special requests. And item 7 states the executive director will provide notice to the Board of Trustees for complimentary past requests over $5,000. And that concludes my remarks. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I'm happy to go over it with you now.
Go ahead, Leonard.
I just have a couple of questions, I guess. One would be the Board of Trustees delegating. An example of that?
Yeah, so I think that in the past, the executive director has had responsibility over, say, for example, certain promotions, pricing related to those promotions. And so in this instance, because pricing of everything is going to the Board of Directors now, they may decide down the road that in the next year or two, it's not necessary to approve all of the pricing because it has been standardized or set, or there's firm guidelines in place. And so I think that would be one example of an instance where they would want to delegate that authority.
Okay, and that was kind of the concern I had, is the previous slide showed that the executive director would be negotiating for bulk fees and educational. And I was just wondering if he's doing the negotiating and then he's doing the approval also, if that might not be the best. I'm just See what I'm saying?
Yeah, so here, not doing the negotiation, but the executive director will keep the board of trustees updated on what negotiations are occurring with individuals and external stakeholders. So not that the executive director is doing those negotiations, but that the executive director is informing on a regular basis the board of trustees of those negotiations that are going on, just so that the board of trustees is updated. We have, over 150 contracts in place, so we have narrowed it down to educational programs and to our higher priced past programs that would be over $200,000, and those would come to the board anyway, because contracts over $200,000 go to the board.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Other questions? So this is, I assume, yeah, we get to vote on that, right? Move that forward to the full board. Any concerns? Okay, a motion to be in order. Someone would like to do that?
I'll make a motion that we approve the Fairs Board of Trustees policy number 4.1.
Second.
Thank you, Troy. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
That was unanimous. Thank you. I know that the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival, they've been in conversation with some special fairs during their events, and it's a good thing to have that opportunity to see what your capacity is or what your ability is and try to help facilitate some of those community events. So thank you. Okay, Bob, we're going on the budget amendment, huh?
Yeah, we'll talk about budget amendment. This is the second budget amendment, and it's specifically about some capital projects. That falls underneath the local advisory council review. These are both increasing the capital budget. The first one has to do with Salt Lake County fourth quarter capital projects. When we did the budget, originally, we didn't know exactly how the Salt Lake County new fourth quarter money would be allocated. So we put it all in our operating budget, knowing that we'd be coming back at some point with an allocation. And that's what this particular amendment does. The second one, we were successful in getting a grant to develop an E-Voucher software program. This replaces a paper system that we have now and will provide additional services to our drivers as well as to those who use our services. So this is the Salt Lake County fourth quarter capital. It's $6 million. This was in consultation with the county. So we're taking $6 million out of a little bit over $11 million, putting it toward capital this year. Remember, it takes us a while to implement service. We have to buy buses. We have to do things of that nature. So the actual service is probably going to go in place August of 2021, somewhere in that time frame. So in the meantime, as the money's coming in, what makes sense to apply it toward. So again, this year we're looking at moving that $6 million down to capital and then spending it on a couple of state good repair projects. One's the track system itself, and then the others are overhauls of our trains that have been here 20 years and making sure we get those done on a timely basis. And then the other ones are capital projects. The depot district is for the facility back here for the buses to help us move more quickly toward a CNG facility. We also need to do some work at Meadowbrook to expand it. One of the things that's important to our drivers is to have restrooms. It helps us and the drivers to have restrooms at logical spots. So we are undertaking, this is kind of the start, a project to add additional restrooms. Steve, I can't remember how many are on the list. It's like a dozen or more. 16. 16. So this is the beginning of that. And then our bus stops, they need to be improved, and we also need to improve our signage. And so that's the recommended allocation of that $6 million. Questions on that before I go to the next one?
I think I'm looking, I don't see any
Okay, I know we should have given you some descriptions of each of those projects. The second one's the E-Voucher Software Capital. We received a grant for $916,000 over a 2-year period. So this takes care of the work we can do this year. It's about $250,000. It's $84,000 of the grant. It's the complete local match of $166,000. Again, I think we provided some information on that. Replacing a paper system will be benefiting everyone involved in this particular program.
Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, Troy.
So you're saying that you're going to go away from all paper, this is the study going away from all the paper tickets?
Well, this is the paper, and I may need to get someone to help me on this, but this is the paper voucher program that's with our human services folks, mainly paratransit.
Okay, so not system-wide.
Right, not system-wide.
You did have someone stand up behind you, but he sat back down, so we're
Okay.
good. Okay.
So I didn't get off too far on that then.
So this is our coordinated mobility program. So it's like our voucher program. So it's not necessarily people traditionally riding the bus or the trains or things like that. So up north, we've already partnered with Weber and Davis County Aging, and it's a voucher program. So if Leonard was my neighbor and I needed a ride, I could get him to give me a ride. I would give him my voucher after I was pre-approved through Weber Davis County Aging, and then he would be able to be reimbursed for his mileage. So this is something that started to go kind of statewide, in different communities. It's not just in our area. There's these things popping up down south. So we're looking at this as being more than just a UTA thing. We've also been talking with partners outside the state, where agencies are interested in getting this type of technology, because across the board, everybody's using paper, but everybody wants to go with a more electronic type format. So there is potential that at some point this could even be a revenue source as we develop the technology.
Okay with that, Troy? You good? Okay, thank you. So we need to move this forward, right?
A couple of other things.
Sure.
Here's the net impact on the budget. It moves it from 165 million to 171 million on the revenue side. Again, 6 million of it just coming from the operating budget. And then the expense also goes up by that 6.2 million to 171,260. And from here, what would happen, whatever advice you have for the board on these items would go forward to the board, and they'll consider a resolution on July 31st.
You good to go, Leonard? You want to move this forward?
Sure, I'll make a motion to recommend approval for the 2019 budget amendment to the Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Mayor Hale. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
I think that was unanimous. Thank you. We need to get something controversial. This next item, is it going to be? No, I'm kidding. Get alive in the conversation. Okay. Service choice report presentation. All right. Laura.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Laura Hanson. I'm UTA's planning director, and we're excited to give you an update on this planning process. And our consultant, Jarrett, is just slipping in, so he'll join me in just a moment.
So not to tell you to be concise and to the point, but I've heard from previous comments that keep it tight.
Keep it tight. Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Well, he's on his way in, I think. But I just wanted to give you all a little context on this process, on kind of what we set out to do, what we're working on, and what we're looking for from you all. So the primary goal for this project really is a budget and resource allocation priority process. So just like any household budget, doing more of one thing sometimes means doing less of another. And so we are looking to our board and to you all to give them some advice to help us prioritize our bus resources in the most effective and appropriate way. So we had an engagement process, and really there were three main goals of the engagement process. The first was to furnish the board with a clear sense of the regional transit priorities of you all and the constituents and residents of the areas you represent, to build public awareness that ridership and coverage are very different goals and that they lead us in different directions, and then really to strengthen partnerships with you all. Make sure that we are listening and being responsive to the community and making decisions that we can then reflect back the feedback that you've shared with us all. We are really at a 50% point in this planning process. So we are asking the Board of Trustees to adopt a statement that gives us some policy direction, and we'll then design a bus network plan that reflects that direction. Today we are here hoping to have a dialogue with you all, get some advice so that the board is informed and they're making the very best decision that they can. We have a bunch of deliverables. One is a choices report that's on our website, a board decision report, which I think you all received a copy of. And then the third deliverable, once we get this direction and develop some more work, will be a bus network plan. And that's really where the rubber hits the road, where you see lines on a map and you'll see how they affect your individual communities and the region as a whole. So we are looking forward to that. I'm going to have Jarrett here walk us through some information about the process, the question that's posed before you, and to your advice to keep it tight and focused. We will try to be efficient in our presentation so that we can maximize our time in dialogue with you.
And I say that just to allow us as a council
Absolutely.
to give you as much feedback as we can.
Absolutely, and that's our goal here today. I do want to reinforce one more thing, is this main direction here, this decision that we're looking for feedback on, is very much a values-based decision. It is like whether you're a cat person or a dog person, I'm sure all of us can make a very compelling argument on why our particular position is the correct one, and that somebody else will have an equally compelling argument on the other side. I'm a dog person, but I have a brand new puppy at home who's chewing on the furniture and is convincing that perhaps a cat is looking a little bit better to me. So with that, I'm going to pass the time over to Jarrett to go through a presentation, and then we'll try and maximize our time with you all. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Just to be clear who I am, I'm, as your consultant, we're the people who do this particular study over and over and over again in lots of particular cities. So while we're here to help you make your decision and solve problems in the context of your community and reflect your values, the expertise we bring is the expertise of knowing how these service planning projects tend to go and what the issues tend to be. I'm going to, as requested, I'm going to skip relatively rapidly through this opening material because I'll come back to it at the end. But the most important thing I need to share with you today is some basic geometric insight about why we have to ask you the ridership coverage question and why that is the question. And I do need to step through this very carefully because as you think about this in your own communities, and as inevitably various people are going to be have opinions about whether they're being treated fairly, it's important to understand the underlying geometry behind why these problems are what they are and why certain decisions have to be made a certain way. So I am going to take a few moments on this because it's really central. When we talk, let me start by with the hypothetical question, what if the goal of your network were ridership? What if that was the primary measure of your success? And I'm going to talk sort of inside that context to understand what it means, what we do when we are pursuing ridership, which can then help you to clarify whether that is in fact what you want UTA to be doing. If you visualize, this is from a project we're doing in Dublin, Ireland, this image, but if you visualize someone somewhere in the city asking, where could I be in 45 minutes or less? That's really a question about what that person can do in their lives, what jobs they could hold, what schools they could go to, maybe where their house of worship could be. Our ability to go places defines our ability to do things. And the answer to that question is some kind of blob, if you will, some kind of area that you can get to in that fixed amount of time. That area is called, the fancy word for that is an isochrone. But we can look at that area and then we can look at what's inside it. and actually measure a person's access to opportunity by measuring, for example, how many jobs are in that area, how many shopping opportunities in that area, whatever it is, right? And the cool thing is that if you make this area bigger, you have through some sort of service change, you have a demonstrable outcome. We've increased, for this particular person, we say she can get to 43% more jobs. That's 43% more opportunities. Now, this is a great thing in itself because, of course, we talk a lot about access to opportunity. And when we talk about economic inequality, part of that is economic immobility, the sense that people are stuck where they are, not able to access the opportunities they need. So this is a good thing in itself, but expanding these blobs is also a very good way of increasing ridership because overall, the primary reason that people don't use transit is that transit is objectively and measurably useless to them. That is to say, the trips they have to make are simply not in these blobs. They're not reachable in an acceptable amount of time, and so transit is not an option. And the easiest thing we can do if the goal is to increase ridership is simply to make more trips possible on transit in a reasonable amount of time. In other words, expand those blobs for as many people as possible. I'm going to skip over these images, which are less critical, and talk more in detail about what it means to design for high ridership. When we want these blobs to be as big as possible, and let me give you an example of what that outcome is. In the Dublin project we did, we were able to say that the average resident can get to 20% more jobs and opportunities of various kinds in 45 minutes. That was a very measurable average outcome across the entire region. Of course, the individual outcome is going to depend a lot on where you are, for reasons I'll talk about. You can't make that evenly the case for everyone. The way we make these blobs as large as possible with the transit product is to provide service that is frequent, and that is also available when you need it. But also, because frequency is expensive, we have to focus it in places where the most people will benefit, and that's where this becomes politically hard. So starting with frequency, we can look either at your own data to show that as frequency gets higher, which is to the left on this diagram, productivity tends to get higher. Productivity is boardings divided by quantity of service, ridership per cost, over cost, basically. And the interesting thing is that since frequency itself increases cost, you might expect the relationship to run the other way, that higher frequency, because it is actually pulling down that ratio. So the remarkable thing is that, in fact, the payoffs of frequency are so dramatic that they overwhelm that effect and give you this positive relationship. This is a composite chart we made from data from the 25 transit agencies that we've worked for since our inception as a firm. And you see exactly the same pattern if you look at huge quantities of data, higher frequency correlating with higher productivity. I want that not to be surprising if you stop and think about how frequency works. Frequency, the elapsed time between consecutive buses on a route, does three independent excellent things. It means you wait less. It also means that you can connect more easily from one route to another, which is critical to how you get access over a large area rather than just along a line. So that connection is a lot of the effect that makes the blobs of access larger. And then finally, third, of course, it's a backstop for reliability. Bus breaks down, the bus is more likely to be along soon. Because those three things are logically independent, you should not be surprised to see this nonlinear payoff, this curved payoff, where as we get up to that 15-minute frequency, things start really taking off. On all of our maps, we're going to use red to indicate that highest frequency, that frequency where people stop relying on the bus schedule and pretty much count on a service coming whenever they need it. And, you know, there's not very much of that now. In the north, it's primarily in and around Ogden. In the center, there's a fairly extensive grid covering Salt Lake City, down a ways to the southwest, including West Valley City and so on. And in the south, it's a single north-south corridor as well as local service, the BRT around Provo. And all. That's what you have evolved so far. But the question is, how much of a priority do you want to put on that kind of highest ridership service as you develop your network? Now, here's the hard part. It's easy to say that frequent service is wonderful. It's much harder to say, well, we're going to put it here, but not there. But frequent service is expensive, so you can't send it everywhere. And if your goal is ridership, or your goal is maximizing that average improvement in people's access, you have to focus it where the most people are there to benefit from it. Now, that raises some very simple issues that I'm about to step through. 4 different features of a particular place: density, walkability, linearity, and proximity. And I want you to notice as I talk about this that it's going to seem as though I'm saying that certain communities are better for transit than others, and I am saying that if the goal is ridership. But this isn't a judgment about the community or the people who live there. It's a judgment about the geometric facts about urban form, about the shape of the community, the way it's built, and how that inevitably directly affects whether transit can succeed. So density, all other things being equal, these 2 bus routes cost the same to operate, but the one in the upper image has twice as many people around every stop. So of course it's going to have twice the ridership, even if just everybody used transit at the same rate. There's no way to avoid density being a dominant variable because it determines the size of the market in a fixed area. Walkability is about, given that there's a number of people within a circle around a stop, how many of them can actually walk to the stop? So in these 2 images on the left, we show you a bus stop in the center and the circle representing a quarter-mile radius, which is a sort of nice abstract walking distance. But then the black lines are the parts of that circle that could actually walk to the stop in a quarter mile. And as you can see, if you have a continuous local street grid, most of the circle can walk to the stop in that distance. But if you have a highly disconnected street grid, if you have sound walls, if you have other kinds of barriers like that, it simply walls off parts of the circle from the transit service, and that means you have a smaller market. It's exactly as though the density were lower as far as transit is concerned. The other important thing to remember about walkability is that we're only really providing effective 2-way service if it is possible to cross the street at every bus stop. Remembering that a transit will almost always take you from this side of the street in the morning and return you to that side of the street in the afternoon. So whichever side of the street you live on, you're going to have to cross the street once a day in order to complete a round trip. That's why streets that are basically impossible to cross for long distances are fundamental barriers to transit, and therefore, again, even if you held density constant, those are weaker transit markets. They're not logical places to invest if ridership is the goal, because people simply can't get to them. Linearity, all of my developer and architect friends understand density and walkability, but linearity is something I have to explain to them because it's unique to transit. Those two images are of 2 different ways that the same 4 places could be arranged, depending on the layout of a city. And if they're all arranged in a straight line, then I can run one line that is a direct path between any 2 of them. That line is also the shortest possible distance, and both of those things mean I can run the highest possible frequency at a given cost. Because obviously if I have to run a longer distance, it's going to cost more. I'm not going to be able to afford as much frequency. The lower image shows the opposite, what happens if the same land uses are built in a more suburban style where things tend to be back away from major streets. And that produces a transit line that is simply less effective. It is longer, therefore harder to operate frequently. It is more circuitous, therefore less attractive. Both of those things reduce the blob of access, all other things being equal. So those become less effective places to invest in transit if the goal is ridership. Now, proximity briefly, obviously it's cheaper to cover shorter distances than longer ones. So now and then you'll see the effect of proximity as well. So the point is, that was just a big if statement. If you wanted ridership, those are the things you would do. That's what we do everywhere when we're designing for a ridership goal. But ridership is not the only thing that any transit agency wants. And so there's an actual trade-off that you have to think about how much you actually want to design toward that goal. So here's a simple illustration of that. Imagine you have this fictional town where the dots are people or jobs. So dots close together are density. So about 70% of this town is along the two major streets, and the rest of it is scattered across a large area. If I have 18 buses to serve this area, how I'm going to design a network depends entirely on what you want. If the goal were ridership, I would do this. I would put all of the service on the two major streets where 70% of the people are. I would therefore be able to achieve a very high frequency because I'm not running very many route miles. I can achieve a very high frequency. As a result, these buses are always coming soon. Therefore, they're very useful to lots of people all the time. Therefore, ridership is high. But someone who lives in the southeast corner of the city doesn't like this. It's excellent. It achieves a high average improvement in access by achieving excellent improvements for 70% and nothing at all for 30%. That's actually the way you maximize the total average outcome. But someone in the southeast corner of the city doesn't like this. And if people come back at us, as they inevitably do, and say, but I need transit, or I'm entitled to transit, that leads to a coverage goal. And if the goal is to put a little service everywhere so that everybody has some, I'll do this. Now I have 10 routes instead of 2. That means these buses can't run very often because I've spread them over so many routes. So now these buses come once an hour instead of every 10 minutes. And because they come once an hour, they're unlikely to be coming when somebody needs them. So ridership is very low. And that's the trade-off. A coverage-oriented network which looks like this will have spread the service out, but spreading it out means spreading it thin. And service that's spread thin, low frequency, much less likely to be useful to a lot of people. And correspondingly, if you look at it in terms of those blobs of access, a much smaller blob, because waiting time is a big part of travel time. So the bottom line is that these goals are both important, but they pull you in opposite directions, and they are opposite because the effect of them on the network is opposite. So when you think about some of the goals that people tend to bring to this issue and some of the policy outcomes that they tend to want, the ridership goal thinks like a business. The coverage goal thinks like a public service. Like a business, the ridership goal chooses which markets it will enter based on whether it thinks it can succeed, whereas the coverage goal feels an obligation to serve everyone. Benefits of the ridership goal include the highest fare revenue, which of course comes with the higher ridership, a support for dense and walkable development, if you're interested in that, because the ridership networks tend to go there with good service reasons, and all of the environmental benefits of transit arise from transit being ridden, not just from transit existing. All the congestion mitigation benefits arise from transit being ridden, not just from transit existing. Sorry, let me just finish this slide. On the coverage side, however, the notion of meeting needs is very widely popular. The notion that transit has a role in meeting needs wherever people have those needs, and of course people have needs everywhere, so that causes us to want to go everywhere. There's also political geography, the expectation that there be service to every member city, every member county, every electoral district. So there are excellent reasons for coverage too. And the question is simply, how much of each of these kinds of service do you want? Was there a question now?
Yeah, my question is, do you have an example of a coverage city versus a ridership city?
The reason I showed these things in the abstract was to be able to illustrate the extremes. I'll come back later to how different cities have found different balances between them. There's no such thing as a 100% ridership city or a 100% coverage city. Everyone's in between somewhere, but the question is exactly where in between you want to be. So let me come back to that.
Is your question more specific to our region, right?
I'm ready. Okay. Oh, it's up here. Okay. No, that is what it was. I wanted to understand exactly how this was being represented. I also like the fact that you're talking about it's not just a city that isn't being covered. It might be other member cities that aren't being covered. And I think that's important to discover when you're talking about this.
It's really important as you get into having your own political conversations on your own geography to understand that everything I presented here is just geometry and it's going to operate in absolutely any geography. And so it's, again, a decision about whether to provide coverage in a certain place does not have to be an opinion about that place. It's just a fact about its urban development if you pattern if you decide to pursue ridership. So here's where you are now. When we look at the existing system, we find that in the central and southern parts of the region, so Salt Lake and Utah counties primarily, about 60% of the service is where it would be if the goal were ridership. So we call that a 60-40 system, 60% ridership, 40% coverage. What we mean by that is, again, if the only goal were ridership, about 60% of that service is where it would be if that were the goal. So that's a kind of starting point, about 60-40 split in favor of ridership. It's quite different in the north. In Davis, Box Elder, Weber, that's more like a 40-60 split. The network up there is much more tilted toward coverage, more of an investment in coverage services, less of an investment in ridership services. So the question is, do you want to turn that dial? Do you want to change that split in any way? So we have had an extensive public and community leader engagement process on this, and I want to quickly summarize what we've heard. The engagement efforts included the single most powerful tool, which was a public web survey, which garnered 3,374 responses. That's a very good number. We had 4 community leader workshops. This was primarily municipal staffs and other key staff level leaders. 114 total attendees. Those were long workshops over 4 hours where we really had the chance to delve into the issues in detail. So I think the opinions that come back from that are very highly informed. 3 public open houses, 14 days of being present at various public events with information. We asked the public and the community exactly the same questions that we are now going to ask you, and that the board needs to ultimately decide based on your advice at the end of this month. Those are, first of all, what's the right balance between ridership and coverage goals? Where on that spectrum do you want to be? Are you in the right place, or do you want to move one way or the other? That question is actually asked twice, once based on existing resources, and another based on if there were new resources. And that's an important distinction, because if you only think about existing resources and you change the split of ridership versus coverage, you're cutting somebody's service in order to add service somewhere else. New resources, however, you're obviously not doing that. With new resources, you're simply deciding where to grow or how to grow. So that's why that's 2 different questions, because it has 2 very different impacts. And then additionally, there's a further question about when we design coverage service, what principles should guide us in the design of coverage service. The design of ridership service, it's very simple. We're maximizing ridership by maximizing access. But coverage is more complicated. There are several different ways to think about coverage, and we asked more about that. So here's the big answer to that question. And this is on your handout, by the way. Looks like this. And all this material is on there, including the question we're about to ask. So when we ask the question, is the ridership coverage balance right? The red cells are people who said, no, turn it toward ridership. The blue cells mean turn it toward coverage, and the gray cells mean keep it where it is. So the community leader workshops, now again, these are mostly senior municipal staffs and so on, were unanimous in wanting to turn the dial a little toward ridership everywhere. Now, that's important because this was not all community leaders from Ogden and Provo and Salt Lake. There was a huge diversity of cities represented there, and so many of them were aware of their own difficulties with what they might gain or lose depending on what decision was made about this split. When it comes to the public in the northern region was comfortable turning the dial a bit toward ridership. That is Davis, Weber, Box Elder. In that area, remember, that's the area where things are now tilted rather toward coverage. There was a comfort with tilting it back a bit, even with existing resources, where that means that some low-density places might lose service or might lose some of their service. In the central region, which is Salt Lake and Twilla counties, the answer tended to be to keep the current split of 60-40. There's one detail to that, which is that when we weighted these responses by zip code, we got a 50-50 response. In other words, lean a little toward coverage. Southern area, Utah County, existing resources, keep the current split, they said. Additional resources tilted a bit toward coverage. And so those are the answers we have from the public. That is part of their advice to you and to the board. And there is considerable more detail about the exact responses to those things if you wanted to delve into them. We then asked the question about coverage priorities, which is when we're laying out coverage service, what is the primary thing we should be responding to? And there are kind of three common theories about this. One is that coverage is primarily about meeting needs, that you focus on people who have some kind of disadvantage where transit will be a big help to them. That can include people who can't drive, like some seniors, disabled people, but it also means low-income people. And so that particular kind of purpose tends to cause you to focus coverage service in places where those particular people are. There's another theory which says it should be about responding to new growth or new horizontal growth or development and going into new neighborhoods as they get built. And there's a third theory, which is we pay taxes to everybody who pays taxes into the district ought to get some service back out of it. Those produce three very different kinds of coverage service, of course, because they change how you focus. The third one, service to all taxpayers, is the one that causes you to spread resources thinnest of all, because that means you have to go absolutely everywhere and are therefore spreading across the largest area, giving you the lowest frequencies. But it's a common thing that's asked for. So the answers are that the community leaders were very clear that serving people with no alternatives is number one. And in most cases, responding to new development is number two, service to all taxpayers is number three, but the north area flipped those two and said service to all taxpayers was more important. Likewise, with the public, the dominant response was, again, serve people with no alternative. The one interesting exception being in the South, when we do not weight the results by population, by zip code. Service responding to growth or new development comes in on top. Let me explain why that is. What I mean by weighting by zip code. We get a whole bunch of survey responses from a particular business unit, and if we just count them all equally, we're going to have a count that's heavily determined by who wrote in, who responded. And when we get a disproportionate response from a couple of zip codes as opposed to the rest of the area, then that zip code is going to carry the day for the whole business unit. So we also do a process of factoring by zip code where we say, if each zip code's responses are factored according to that zip code's share of the population, how does it balance out? And it basically helps us notice if the responses from a particular area came overwhelmingly from a certain part of that area. So in the South, what we noticed is that the responses were very heavily weighted to new horizontal growth areas like Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain. And as a result, when you don't weight the results, you get the number one response is respond to new development. But when you do factor those results according to the population of the area, it comes out like all the others, focus on people with no alternative. So those are the questions that we're about to ask. What would it look like to change the balance of service? Well, I'm just going to say in very general terms that if you look at the north area, a greater focus on ridership would put more service in roughly the red areas, which is the main corridor up north and south, not the freeway, but the highway next to it, as well as Ogden because of its density and Bountiful more because of its proximity to Salt Lake, which makes it a more cost-effective market to serve. But this is in very general terms. Don't take these maps too literally. Salt Lake, you would see, again, the large urban grid extending far beyond the city of Salt Lake, but certainly with, fewer ridership arguments for service in the far south. Utah County, we would be talking, a ridership goal would tend to put more service in Provo and Orem and in the corridor up to Lehigh. Again, remember, those aren't judgments about anybody's community. They're about the extent to which those urban forms give us density, walkability, linearity, and proximity, which are the necessary conditions for deploying high ridership service most effectively. Now, when I ask this ridership coverage split question, people always ask me what other cities have done. So we keep track of this for projects that we've done, because we're doing this kind of project several times a year in different parts of the country. And if you look at these 5 cities that we know well, Houston, Columbus, Fresno, San Jose, and Richmond, they have in almost all cases, the board has made a decision to turn the dial slightly toward ridership, or in Houston's case, quite heavily toward ridership, from 55% ridership up to 80% ridership. Where this has been done, the ridership outcomes have been positive. We're really proud to say that relatively few U.S. transit agencies have rising ridership, but a majority of the ones that do are places we've worked and done this process. So there's a general tendency in the industry to want to turn the dial toward ridership, but that does not mean for a moment that I am recommending you do that. It's just an interesting data point if that interests you. So the questions that the board is going to be asked to answer at the end of the month, and which we ask for your advice on we encourage you to give them advice on that beforehand, are listed on the right side of your worksheet here. The questions are separate for each business unit because there's no intention to move resources from one business unit to another. So within each business unit, how would you strike that balance? In the northern region, so in each of those business units, we're saying, here's the current ratio. Do you want to change it? If you change it, what would you change it to with existing resources? And then separately, if there were new resources, how would you divide those resources, separate from how you divide existing resources? So for example, you could say, I want to keep the existing split for existing resources, but I want new resources to go more toward coverage or more toward ridership or whatever. Those are all answers to the question. And then in the far right, again for each business unit, we ask you to tell us how you would rank in order those 3 common reasons that coverage service is provided. Let me ask you too, to speak up if you feel like there's more information that would be helpful to make this recommendation. So I'm not going to step through all these slides because these slides just say what's right here on the page in front of you, which is the same question we're asking for each of the 3 business units and about coverage priorities.
You ready
I would
to go?
like to stop talking at this point.
Good. Julie?
I have a question about economic development and growth patterns. So a lot of the new growth that's going to be coming into Utah County, for instance, is all centered around areas where people can get to jobs, people who, can affordable housing is a crisis. So when you can buy a house out in like Eagle Mountain for $230 that you can buy where I am for like $650, the affordable housing is where is where the coverage comes into play. Or if you are trying to build a city and you have all this economic development that's coming in, they want to be near the ridership lines. And so if you're trying to build something, I think that's where the coverage comes into play. And my question is, as you're assessing this, does that account for economic development, growth patterns, affordable housing, things like that?
Because the ridership coverage question arises purely out of urban geometry, it isn't directly, economics doesn't touch it. But economics and your intentions for your community should guide what you do about it, right? But they don't change the fact that you have to answer this question in this form. So when you think about economic development, there's no question that what we often call the suburbanization of poverty, the tendency for affordability to cause people to move outward, affordability concerns to cause people to move outward, is worsening the overall ridership coverage trade-off problem. Because people who are more likely to have needs, people who are more likely to not have options, are increasingly being encouraged to live in places where transit to them is expensive to provide, because it's a coverage area. One of the ways that there are also issues associated with business location decisions, where the cheapest place to locate for a business may be a place where employees will have very long commutes, and where transit service may not be efficient. Right? So those are some of the kinds of problems. Because this is about urban form, of course, planning decisions, land use planning and development decisions do change this reality, and they can change it in a way that is either more conducive to high ridership transit or less conducive. And that's really the role of master planning, of integrating land use planning with transportation planning, which I know UTA is really happy to do on their end. And so that you encourage more development in forms that will be dense, walkable, and linear, and therefore easy for.
Okay, Laura, go ahead. You
I
want
was
to say
just going
something?
to cut in there really quickly. We plan to ask the same question every 5 years and look at all of our data to reflect the changes in the land use. So this is a snapshot in time. We do need some direction, but it will not be the only time. This isn't setting anything in stone forevermore. So we plan to update things. And go ahead. We'd really love to hear your thoughts on this, how you feel about it.
Okay, let's go over to Mayor Biskupski. and
Yeah,
then
well, I'm going to
Linda.
follow up on the mayor's comment and just word it a little differently. If ridership is a big deal in my city, but are the cities picking coverage at a certain percentage to pick up disadvantaged communities or individuals? Is that where the coverage piece really falls, or is it really all about taxpayers should all have equal access?
Well, what we heard on the coverage priorities question was that when people think of coverage, they most often think of need. They most often think of disadvantage. And that is the strongest argument for coverage and the number one priority for how coverage should be focused. And that the second priority is responding to new development, and the third priority is service to all taxpayers. So from that direction, if you were to endorse that direction, that is the correct priority order, then what we would come back to you with in the fall would be a plan where you would see that coverage services tend to be more, for example, in low-income areas than wealthy areas, even if density is the same. So that's some of, that, but I think the reality is that reasons people argue for coverage are really all three of these, which is why we put all three of these down. They're all part of why people ask for it.
I will add that we have several different tools to provide coverage service that span from flex routes to maybe a limited number of more productive routes to something like microtransit. There's a bunch of tools that we have available to us. We're asking the higher elevation question at this point in terms of how big of the slice of the pie should we dedicate towards ridership and how much of the pie should go towards coverage. And then we get down into that next level of detail of really designing what that looks like.
Leonard, go ahead.
Well, my question is right along the same lines. I'm sitting here wondering if the priority drives the balance, or are we trying to establish the priorities within the balance that we want to establish? In other words, if I have a community whose needs are really serving those that don't have alternate transportation, and that's number one goal, then somebody, instead of me saying what the coverage pattern should be, that should be driving the balance. In other words, somebody else should be telling me, well, if you want to achieve this goal, this is what your balance should be.
So a logical way to think about that would be to think about your own communities and certainly about your own business unit, since the funds can move around within a business unit. Think about your own business unit. Think about where, to the extent to which in your business unit, you've got people of high need located in places that are not dense, not walkable. And if so, and if that's your priority, then it would be logical for you to prefer a higher coverage percentage, because you will need more of that if that's your top priority.
Let's go to Troy, and then we'll come back to you.
So let's talk about like an air quality perspective.
Okay.
One of my goals, at least if I could be in charge, would be to get more workers out of their cars on a daily basis. How do you coordinate which of these models I'm assuming ridership shifts towards getting more people out of their cars. And it looks like to me, if I was to write down what I wanted to do, I would probably increase ridership from 60 to 70 to 30. In all future, I would try and extend the coverage. It seemed like to me that would bring in more of the future workers, future employers, as we have growth. Like, so I guess can you
it is
address
in
that?
the nature of coverage service that it is spread thin over a large area, and it is therefore in the nature of coverage service that it's hard to make it really attractive. What you can, because you can't afford the frequency to be there every time anyone's traveling. So the classic example is the suburban manufacturing area that has a lot of low-wage jobs, but where the shifts all begin and end at different times and in the middle of the night, and fixed route coming once an hour even, can't hit those shifts close enough, and there's no way to get them coordinated. That's a typical example. So I would never say that so is that one of the two things too, is your concern about air quality basin-wide or outcomes from a particular area? I mean, most air quality outcomes are sort of all mixed together. And in that case, frankly, turning the dial toward ridership, which gives you more people out of their cars in total, is likely to continue to be the thing that gives you the better air quality outcome. But that means that people who work in those business parks that are not dense, walkable, or linear probably aren't going to rely on transit to get there. You may have, and now if the reason that people need to get to those jobs is need, that is to say they're minimum wage jobs, right, and they need a way of getting out there, that's coverage, but that's not related to air quality. That's a whole different goal. Right? So that's what you have to think about. I would say that as you turn the dial toward ridership, a clearer message goes out to employers that if you are not located in a place that is dense, walkable, linear, you're probably going to need more carpooling programs to achieve whatever sort of employee trip reduction or air quality goals you want, because transit is not going to be able to do that.
Well, what I will say is, as you look at this central region, the needs of Salt Lake City versus Tooele County are completely different. And so you could shift these numbers. At the end of the day, the 40% on coverage, that hasn't been figured out well enough to even really work. And that's a concern. So I would love to shift to heavy ridership, but there's not enough dialing down internally to figure out how do we better serve those coverage areas or those individuals who really need the rides.
Well, let me assure you that the next thing that happens is that we design a draft network that comes back to everyone to review. Well, and this is an iterative process, right? But what we're starting with is to ask you, what basic balance of goals do you want the draft network to be designed to, right? Coverage can probably be done a little more efficiently. But I do want to warn you, by the way, many agencies I've worked in, at the beginning of the process, it's clear that the network contains a lot of waste. And so that's easy then, of course, because there's service we can redeploy without there really being losers. I want to assure you that's not really true here. There are certainly probably things that could be done more efficiently, things we may find 10% in sort of things we can make more efficient. But your network does not present obvious waste. And as a result, I do think that, I stand by the basic question we'd want to ask you, which is, how much do you really want to devote to coverage in each of your areas? Which in your business unit, of course, would be Tooele County and, areas of the south and west. And, within the city, just a few nooks and crannies probably that aren't on the frequent network.
I would add your comment that the coverage service that we have right now in Salt Lake County isn't working very well is a perfect example of the spread it out, spread it thin consequence of coverage. It's just simply not as high quality service. Therefore, people don't find it as useful because we've spread our resources out of a larger area, just like peanut butter on bread. The more we concentrate it, the more useful it is. Therefore, the more people ride.
Well, I get it, but as the mayor was saying earlier, the people who really need the ride get left out. And at the end of the day, that becomes not just an equity issue, it becomes a paralyzing circumstance for people.
So if you want to give us that direction, that would be the direction on the second question to put need number one among the coverage priorities. And that would give you that outcome, greater focus on places of higher measurable need.
And potentially a shift towards more of the pie going towards coverage. I'll remind you also that we have several tools to help us provide coverage service. One thing that we're trying this fall is a microtransit pilot, which is similar to an Uber, Lyft sort of ride-hailing service. So that is still, it is not a silver bullet. It is still more coverage. It's still a driver in a vehicle that needs to be paid. But maybe it's more effective service and higher quality service than flex routes that kind of meander all over the place for fairly equivalent cost. And so there are ways to make it more effective, but it's that high level question of how big of the pie should go towards coverage.
I think we need to have two transit systems. Seriously, one that's based solely on ridership, and the other is based on coverage. Because we pick up the people that they have no other source.
I will tell you, our service plan that we come back with after, we get this direction, we develop a plan with lines on the map, we will very clearly delineate these are ridership-focused routes and these are coverage goal routes. And that's critical because you all will be getting phone calls saying, there's an empty bus running through my neighborhood. What a waste of public tax dollars. And you'll say, no, that's not a waste because the job of that bus route is to provide coverage. And we know that coverage doesn't generate a lot of ridership. So we'll clearly delineate.
But I think if you have a business unit that specifically covers those that have no other means of transportation, they focus solely on that, they develop that system around those individuals, those people, that you're going to be more successful than trying to balance between ridership and coverage, because it'll be a political debate that will go on.
Well, even if you had two business units, then the question would be, how do you divide resources between them? I mean, it doesn't really avoid the basic question we're asking.
We do have our special services business unit, which provides the paratransit service, runs our flex service, and kind of the innovative coverage type services. So in some sense, we do have that already, but it's a matter of how we divide the resources.
I was just going to say, I agree 100%, because I use the example, and I'll use Pleasant View as an example. You said based on providing for people of need, it'd be more coverage-based, except probably 90% of my need is more linear. In other words, my high density and low income housing is more along a specific corridor.
Then that's a ridership corridor,
Yeah,
probably.
Right. But what about the other 10% of people that the only way to get to the store, or the only way to get, and that's that second component.
So
they've still got to be able to get to the store, and so.
I think I want to make sure we haven't gone off course here in clarifying that high ridership service also serves a lot of people in need. The thing is, we're used to thinking of people in need as a demographic category, but thinking about transit requires us to think separately about them based on where they are. And, as in every part of the region, there are places where people in need are living in places that are dense and walkable and linear. And when you choose to invest in ridership, you are choosing to invest in those places. Right? Yeah. So in Salt Lake City, for example, it's the frequent network plan that Salt Lake City has already developed. And a lot of people in need live on that. But then the coverage question is the question of what do you do for people in need who live in harder to reach places that are not, in straight lines, dense and walkable.
Or not even necessarily hard to reach, because I can tell you, living in the biggest city, our paratransit service still isn't meeting the demands or the needs. And so how do you really do this effectively for communities across the state if you can't do it effectively for the capital city?
So let's be very careful that paratransit is a different topic and is not part of what we're looking at here. We're looking at general public service for everyone. I understand, but I mean, we have to sort this out according to the purpose of the service. Paratransit, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, paratransit is a civil right that arises from the inability of disabled people to use the transit system that everyone else can use. So it needs to exist. It has that place.
We have to provide that service anyways, right? Yeah.
But issues about.
So, point taken, and I think that can be a separate conversation. I think that's a level below this one. That is, maybe let's take another look at how we design our paratransit service. But that right now is all based on a federally mandated buffer around our fixed route services, right? So if we get our fixed route services in the right place, then it would lead to the paratransit service being in the right place as well.
I think that then my advice would be, I think there needs to be a balance. I don't know if that's a 70-30 or a 60-40, but I think that looking at the bigger picture of not just ridership, but how we deal with some of the major issues that we're dealing with in Utah and in this region of economic growth, of first and last mile, of creating that walkability community in other places, of air quality and getting people to have jobs in their own communities. I mean, all of it ties in. I would say that you really need to focus on the bigger picture of what does that ridership do. I live in a ridership area. Well, we grow at 400% a year. We're really growing. 5,000 people are coming into our city yearly. We're only 6 miles. So this getting out for coverage doesn't really necessarily affect me, but I know overall it does, because as this ridership isn't in the covered areas, all the growth comes to my city. And that really changes the dynamic. And we are completely walkable. And we have a front runner station in our city that's being built. I mean, I'm just thinking of a long-term thing. We really need to consider a bigger match, because that micro transit, those van pools, those things that connect people in from just the last mile to get over to State Street in Orem in my area, it makes a huge difference. And we need to consider those things, because you cannot leave your car at home and use transit without that. And I mean, parking's a huge problem in my city, so I can talk about that for hours,
I'd just like to say that I appreciate everyone's perspectives and how this looks and what your own concerns are. I just want to emphasize that the advantage of actually answering the question that we have asked is that we can implement your answer in this plan within the context of what we're doing in this plan. Obviously, you talk about many interconnected things, some of which are outside of what transit can do, or outside of what this plan can do in terms of looking at the bus network. I would emphasize, when you talk about living in a ridership area but taking a great deal of growth, you have a stake then in whether, if in a high density area, if everybody gets into cars, that's congestion, right? And so, yeah.
That's what we have.
That's what you have, right? And so it's very difficult. I mean, low density coverage areas, if everyone gets into cars, they don't generate much local congestion because they're not very dense, although they can generate regional congestion when they all get on the freeway. High density area, if everyone gets into cars, you have congestion right away. So it matters a lot, sort of how you think about that in terms of how to turn the dial. But what I want to emphasize is that this is the particular way we've asked this question arises out of the geometry of how transit works. It's not the answer. This question doesn't answer every question. But if you answered this question, the reason we've asked the board to answer this question is that if we have the answer to this question the way we have asked it, we can actually implement it and we can actually show you that we've done what was asked.
Thing I might add is that we do plan to update this every 5 years, ask the same question, take another look at our bus network plan. And if your community doesn't get the kind of transit service that you're hoping to, you have the ability as local government leaders to change that geometry, to change the density, to change the proximity and the linearity of the way your communities are designed. And so if you see transit as a critical piece to your community's future, you are empowered as local governments through your zoning and street design to help lead you towards a type of community development pattern where it's easier to serve with transit. And so today, again, this is not set in stone forever, evermore. This is a snapshot in time to allow us to take that next step and bring you back maps that will really show where the bus network will look. We'll also be developing a vision map that says, if more resources become available in the future, where are we going to go in the future? So here's today, here's where we'd like to be, and then we can come back and talk about that some more.
So what I'd like to see is if you had a model, 100% ridership, how many cars would you decrease on the road? And what impact would it actually have? If we do 100% and we have a minor impact, are we just chasing our tail? Are we really making a difference?
I think there are two separate questions there, which is, you're asking a question about the value of transit investments versus other kinds of investments in producing a congestion outcome. And that's above my pay grade. The question I can answer is, inside of the box of the money you're investing in transit, what's going to give you the better outcome? And the answer is, if your concern is congestion, the answer is going to be to lean toward ridership. That's what I can do at my pay grade inside my expertise. You have a larger question, obviously, as a region about how much you want to invest in transit as opposed to into other kinds of investments for those goals.
I think part of our job on this board, obviously, is to represent the areas that we're asked to represent and the constituents in the area. And I represent the southwest quadrant of the Salt Lake Valley, which is a very rapidly growing area and limited opportunity, limited resources that are available when it comes to transit. So for me, looking at it selfishly for the southwest quadrant, it'd be very easy for me to answer these questions. And I would say with existing, we need to change the balance to a 50-50 and focus more on the expansion of the system. And then for future, I would say we need to be even heavier, more of a 70-30 for future, because we have in favor of coverage. And I think that one of the critical steps, we're doing a good thing in planning here, but I think one of the critical steps that needs to happen along with us is planning with the individual communities. And how do they best plan to get the best bang for their buck in enhancements in the system down the road? If you have a community that's setting aside a dedicated right-of-way for tracks expansion, but that's not really on the long-range plan or goal of the system, then what are they really accomplishing that? Or should they be getting wider roads in where they could have, dedicated bus lane, because that's the vision. There has to be some connectivity between what they're doing internally and even down to that local level to be able to plan most effectively, because then then we stand the best chance of being successful in both areas, and that is expansion of the system and increased ridership along the way.
You have an interesting challenge here because you do all represent specific areas, yet UTA is a regional entity, and so we need to make regional decisions at the same time, and so that's a balancing act that you all need to
And I would
make.
just add, obviously, this whole conversation is about UTA's region-wide funds. Cities, as Salt Lake has already done, can choose to make their own investments in transit, and that's a separate.
So were you wanting us to give you a percentage, or were you wanting us to write it down and then give it to you, or how were you expecting us to do this?
Our goal is for the board to make a specific numerical split for each of these areas. I think it is up to you all and your chair to determine what kind of recommendation or feedback you want to give to the board. You're all empowered and have authority to approve the service plan, which is the next step after this. So we'll be bringing that back to you. I think you can just give your advice, your feedback, and say, you know what, our gut reaction is we want to focus more on need, and we want to focus more on coverage, or we want to focus more on ridership because of air quality. That's really kind of, I think, the feedback that the board is looking for. If you want to go down to the level of saying, we think, in the Ogden area, it should be this percentage ridership and this percentage coverage, you're certainly empowered to do that. I think it's up to you.
Mayor Hill, you had a...
When I took this responsibility from the Council of Government, I was given multiple cities to consider. Not only Midvale, where I am the mayor, Murray, Cottonwood Heights, Sandy, Mayor Walker's probably got Draper under control. But there's some varying needs. Midvale has 3 track stations. We have some good bus routes, but not everybody, as has been brought up over and over and over in our discussion, that needs service are getting service. And so I'm going all over the spectrum in how I should respond to this. Because I know you get up into Cottonwood Heights and outside of one main highway, there is no transit service, bus service. And so I don't know how to answer it, honestly.
It's really challenging. You know, one way to think about this is UTA exists as a public entity because transit agencies are public because the private market doesn't meet all of the needs. We know that transit service is not profitable. It just never is going to be because it's really expensive, right? So we have an opportunity to try to not compete with the private sector on things that they do better and to focus really in on the things that public transit does best. And I think that's up to you all to decide what that is. And maybe that's maximizing ridership, or maybe that's filling the public need. But that's another way to think about it is what other mobility options are out there, and where is the best area? What's our niche that we do best and that we can focus on as a transit agency?
In my opinion,
That may not help.
until microtransit is implemented, we're all envisioning 35-foot bus, 80-passenger buses going everywhere. And I've lived in a micro area, and I know how much better that would serve much of the community that I'm representing. And so I don't know how to move it in that direction.
Microtransit is coverage service. If you want microtransit, you want more coverage service because it's not a high ridership thing in terms of riders per driver hour, right? So that's how microtransit fits. I think I would just want to emphasize that you're welcome to answer this question specifically or not, but at the end of the month, the board will be answering this exact question in these exact words. And so if you want to influence that, either collectively or as individuals, it would be a matter of, advising the board on how they should answer these questions, because that's what they'll have to answer.
Well, I think each of us, the areas that we represent, can give a thumbnail sketch of, you mentioned 3 municipalities. Based on your vision and what you understand, for Cottonwood Heights, this is what it would be. For Midville, it'd be this. If you care to do that, that might be helpful. If I were a commissioner, I think whatever feedback that I could receive would give you a little bit more basis to try to make your decision on how it's split.
Yeah, because for a city like ours, of course, ridership is a big deal. We have areas, though, that aren't served well that we're trying to fix right now. But then you have a community like Mill Creek, right? And so, yeah, it feels like there's winners and losers based on who sits in these seats. And we're put in a position that doesn't feel good, honestly.
I understand it's a difficult question.
Go ahead.
I'm willing to kick this off and tackle the northern region here and make a recommendation for the northern region. And mine would be basically to keep it the 40-60, and then as far as the coverage resources would be 1, 3, and 2. And the reason I say that is the entire Weber County is different from Ogden, kind of like you made the distinction between Tooele and Salt Lake. However, there are specific, like the TOD that Ogden's working on, and some other areas that are addressing specific concerns there in their area, that can be addressed like that. But all the rest of Weber County, I believe the 60-40 is the best split for that. Or excuse me, 40-60.
46 segments.
Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So we have both for existing resources and then for future resources. Would you say 40 ridership, 60 coverage for both existing and future?
Yes.
And I think Leonard can represent the far northern of the northern. I'll take the rest.
Yeah. Yes, that's just.
Yeah. Take notes. I think the problem that we have, in Davis County, is more traffic oriented too, which would help if we push that ridership to 60-40 or 50-50 like was in the poll.
The clock thinking I got to get through Davis County to get home.
Exactly. You'll hit that. And when you're in Kaysville and Layton, Leonard, you remember your percentage, okay? Yeah. No, but I think in the Davis County area, I think that ridership definitely needs to go at least to 50-50 to try to help alleviate some of the traffic concerns that we have and congestion issues. So that, like I said, that's just a, you know, from my area and the, you know, and I represent, you know, a city that has one bus route that goes through it, and I know what coverage means and I know what ridership means, but I also, I think as a general public, we want to have an effective, efficient system. And sometimes, you know, that's a give and take, and that's the big, you know.
That's what's wrong with this whole model, though, is that if it was to go up to Box Elder, Karen's not here, but, you know, they're probably leaning more to an 80% coverage.
Oh, is it farther north you go?
Yeah,
Sure.
farther north you go. So we're trying to consolidate it and go, oh, hey, the northern region wants, I don't know.
So just take whatever average I said and Leonard said and split it, and it'll be good for the northern area.
So 45, 55.
All right, let's hear it. And coverage, 1, 2, 3?
So more coverage in new resources.
Well, you might think I've lost my mind. If I was to go current today, I'd switch it to 80/20 like Houston did on the current equipment. But and this is where I might be crazy. I'd go 30% ridership and 70% coverage on the new stuff, just because I think that addresses where we're growing and it will ultimately merge into more as we urbanize. And then my priority on the coverage priorities would be 2, 1, 3. But I have a prison site about to be developed, and you know.
Wait, what did you say on the new services?
I'd do 30% ridership, new service, 70% coverage. But you know, just anecdotally, we have an employer in our city that it's been there for a long time that I didn't even realize, and I talked to Matt about this. They have almost 1,000 employees. They're near a front runner line, but their access to it is poor. And almost all of their employees drive. I think less than 0.5% don't drive every single day. And I wasn't even aware of it. And I think it's a quick fix. I think it's a microtransit fix that could get 100, 200, maybe 400 cars off the road every day. But you know, maybe it's a combo of that kind of stuff. So anyway.
Mayor, do you want to add anything?
I think the 60/40 right now is good for your existing. I do have concerns about how the valley is developing and Tooele is developing, and I understand where Troy is with his mindset. Probably stay at 60/40 future as well, because we are still growing internally in all those spaces, and rapidly so.
And do you have input? You have input on the priority of those 3 coverage purposes? It sounded like you were most interested in meeting needs, but.
So if you are looking at it, the service for people with no transportation, that would be my number 1 as well. And service responding to growth is 2, and service to all taxpayers is 3.
How about our Utah County friends?
I'll finish off Salt Lake County really quick.
Oh, yeah, please. Sorry.
I'll concede a little bit with some of the conversation that's had on the existing and stay the 60/40 that's currently there, but would go to 70 coverage, 30 ridership on new.
30/70 then.
30/70 or 70/30?
Well, 70 coverage and 30 ridership.
Got it.
Ridership. And then priorities would be the 2, 1, 3 for me.
Okay, Mayor Fulmer.
Okay. I wanted to make a comment about who we do represent, because I do represent Vineyard. I also represent people who brought me in here. So I talk to all of the mayors throughout our region all of the time and into the northern region. So Like Mayor Biskupski said, I'm thinking about all of the different areas, and I'd be happy to find out the different percentages that each of those mayors have at our COG or MPO meeting and send those to in the next couple of weeks, because I don't know if that would make a difference, but I feel like if we keep it at the 60-40 for existing, I think that's fine personally. And for me, I think that going to a 50-50 or a 40 ridership, 60 coverage would balance it out. I don't know the funding cycles for this, exactly how you're implementing it, but I think you need to review it more than every 5 years. Just with the growth that we're all experiencing right now and the way the market is, I just don't think 5 years is a sufficient timeline.
Can I clarify that just a little bit? So this big engagement process where we go out and talk to the community, we're thinking will happen every 5 years, similar to a general plan update. We do have a service plan, the 5-year mobility plan that you all will be recommending approval of, that will be updated every 2 years, and every single year we will be looking at data and performance metrics and being able to report that back to you. So there's a lot of interim steps. We'll be tweaking and updating the service plan itself every couple of years. The big engagement process we're thinking happens on a little bit broader timescale.
I'd also ask the question about, we identified some other, I'd call goals, and I don't know if they're priorities or sub-goals or whatever, and that's air quality, congestion reduction, some of those certainly could become priorities. I don't know.
Definitely.
I drove into Salt Lake County, was it yester?day? And there was just this, it was hot and it was
Is there a way to,
gross, yeah.
is there a way to maybe postpone this for another month? I'd like to take this to our Conference of Mayors meeting and take a blank sheet for every one of them to
Each
fill out,
individual city.
just to see what, like you said, what does everybody think about it? Maybe, is there a way to give us, well, I don't know when our next COM meeting is. It's probably, at least from Salt Lake County. I mean, I think it might be helpful to get the input of our mayors. I mean, I think
Yeah, we can get with MAG as well, and
any one
they
of the
could
three of
get
us
out.
could, from our side, could explain what it means. I think I understand it now.
If you can collect that information and then give it back to us, I guess the question is, do you need to discuss it all again as a group, or can you just submit that feedback and trust the board to consider it?
Of course.
The board's deciding.
The
Yeah,
31st,
the board will consider it and decide for sure, yeah.
and that's on the 31st, you're making your decision.
Well, that's when we're scheduled to meet next and talk about this next. They have the option to push that decision off if they'd like.
Carlton, what do you think?
Well, I know the goal is for the 31st. I think we want the right answer. And so when the right answer is achieved at, that's when we'll make a decision.
Sounds like you're giving us some wiggle room,
Well, if there's an
if it's needed.
Yeah, if there's a desire for you to seek some additional feedback, it would be probably not fair for us to ask you to do that in one meeting.
Okay.
This is about as important of a decision as we're going to make. And I mean, if we're talking about the future and what it means air quality wise, traffic congestion wise, I think we got to get all of our elected officials on the hook on it. At least I'd like to.
Sure. And if you want to meet again, that's fine. If you want to just give feedback to your staff.
Well, why don't we talk to Wasatch Regional Front and MAG and see if we can move it quickly to the mayors and then give you that time frame. We can respond pretty quickly from their perspective, how quickly we can gather that information. Don't you think?
In Davis County, we won't meet again until August. There's a meeting tonight, but it's just a summer social thing with no business. But that would be the third Wednesday in August.
In August.
And unless I reach out to individually, but that would be below average.
Would you produce a few extra of these for us? I'll take charge of
Be
getting
happy
them
to.
to the meeting if you want. I think the common would be the best place to do it from that perspective.
We're trying to broaden the base so, we get more
We appreciate, it's a
voices
really
in it.
difficult decision, and yeah, it's to Mayor Biskupski's point, it's a hard decision, and it doesn't feel good to pick winners and losers. Unfortunately, staff has to plan a network plan.
Sure. Okay, are we kind of where we are? Are we okay? Action items, we need to move quickly, and if we want additional information from the different municipalities, and we're looking for meeting dates, and we're not finding them, so, but we can contact the leaders of those groups and see, and you can reach out as well. I mean, we'll give them a double whammy, so, okay? I think they could. Yeah.
May I just thank you all for this great dialogue, great discussion. It's a challenging decision. We know that you're all taking this very seriously, and we really appreciate the thoughtfulness that's going into it and all of your time here today. I want to thank our consulting team, Jared Walker Associates. They've been fantastic. Also, our engagement team was the Langdon Group. And then I just want to highlight Alex Boehm, raise your hand, Alex, and Carrie Doan. They're on our long-range strategic planning team. Alex has been the project manager for this and has done a really great job with it. So thank you all for all the thoughtfulness.
We were hoping you'd just come here and tell us what to do, and it would be perfect, but that's probably not quite how it works, so thank you. All right, I think we're at the point of other business. Do we have any other business? Okay. I guess we can have a motion to adjourn. I like that. There's a second motion. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.